Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. My name is Mike Froman. I'm president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and we are honored to be able to host today's launch of the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Prosperity, which is a partnership made possible by the leadership of Secretary Raimondo, Joe Bay, and Natarajan Chandrasekaran from Tata, and as well as the partnership of the steering committee. We're honored to host this for a couple of reasons. One is there is really no more important region to the U.S. than Asia over the long run. It being the home of such a significant part of global GDP growth, of trade growth, of growth in patents and internet users, and of the growth in renewable capacity as well. And it's also, of course, a region where the role of China is playing a very significant role, and the relationship between China and the rest of the world poses a number of challenges. This administration's Indo-Pacific efforts have focused really on how to make those challenges opportunities as well. And one of those has been really around IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Last year, the Commerce Department concluded 3 IPEF pillars on supply chains, on the green transition, and on tax and anti-corruption. And they did this all in about a year and a half worth of work. Now, having been somewhat involved in another negotiation in the region, I can say that doing all of that in a year and a half is really quite a Herculean task. So kudos to the Commerce Department. We're also honored to host this here at the Council because it very much aligns with a fundamental theme of the Council, which is really bringing together government and the private sector. There are so few issues now that can be solved just by government alone. And it takes government cooperating with the ingenuity and the resources of the private sector to deal with everything from pandemics to climate change to the impact of emerging technology. And that's what this event is all about, that public-private partnership in a real way. It's my pleasure now to turn this over to Ray Chambers, who has many, many titles, really global citizen being perhaps the most important, but he's also the ambassador at large for the World Health Organization.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, Mike, and thank you especially for hosting all of us tonight in this beautiful venue. This undertaking that Mike described with the IPEF and then the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Prosperity, we've been calling it IP3 because it's too much to remember, is so important because nothing like this is going on in the world today. And this was truly the vision of Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo at a time when we see so much imbalance, uncertainty, polarization in the world, and thinking about somewhat intractable problems like climate change, pollution, artificial intelligence, and not if, but when the next pandemic. We're not going to be able to address those issues country by country. We have to come together in some way. And the uniqueness of what the Secretary has suggested here is really, I think, a step that others will be emulating only because we need to follow that road in order to solve some of these problems. The other part of this that's unique that Mike referred to is this is really encouraged to bring together the private sector with the public sector, especially with the flow of capital and finance. And you'll see our steering committee is the envy of any public company's board of directors when you hear their names and understand their diversity. When Secretary Raimondo and I first got together to speak about a public-private partnership to work alongside of the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, we did focus on leadership. And we agreed that if we could find the right leaders, not just the CEO and C-suite management, but the board of directors, whom we're hoping the steering committee will be, is so important. And having that type of leadership moving through the startup phase into something of a longer term life is really, really significant. And the thought is that these 14 countries have come together so uniquely where they're all about helping one another, especially with respect to economic opportunity, sustainability. And I just think this is one of the most important, somewhat extraordinary opportunities I've seen to address some of the most difficult problems in the world. And we have as our leader one of the most respected leaders in the world, Secretary Gina Raimondo. And she envisioned this, really led the putting together of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and with her team at Commerce, has been involved in every step, the selection of every member of the steering committee, what the strategy could be or portend. And it has been such a pleasure to work with Secretary of Commerce Raimondo. And she has a vision and can see it many years down the road that's been guiding us as the steering committee. And I know that others will be following a structure and a coming together like this. On our steering committee, as I said, it would be the envy of any public corporation. Joe Bay of KKR and Natarajan Chandrasekaran are the co-chairmen, and you'll hear from Chandra a bit later. But we're also proud to have Afana Beschloss, the CEO of Rock Creek, Michael Froman, whom you've heard from, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Matt Harris, founding partner of Global Infrastructure Partners, Amy Hepburn, who's the CEO of the Investors Leadership Network, Merit Jano, who's the independent board chair of MasterCard and a professor at Columbia University, Charles Kay, who's CEO of Warburg Pincus, James Kondo, who's chairman of the International House of Japan, Ra Shah, who's president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Anthony Tan, CEO of Grab, and Jaime Zobel, chairman of Ayala Corporation. And this group has come together and is really committed to putting more substance on the skeleton of the structure of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework in this public-private partnership. I now have the pleasure of introducing you to one of our co-chairs. As I said, his name is Natarajan Chandrasekaran, and he'll be coming to us via satellite. As a prominent and globally recognized leader, Chandra leads the Tata Group of companies, which includes 30 publicly listed corporations, mostly in India, with a combined market capitalization that exceeds US $365 billion. Chandra is deeply committed to expanding cooperation to unlock new trade and investment opportunities throughout the Indo-Pacific. So his participation as a co-chair further increases the stature of IP3 and the rapid impact it will achieve across the region. We are extremely privileged to count him as a leader of this effort. While Chandra was not able to join us in New York City this evening, we are fortunate enough to have him participate at such an early hour from Mumbai via Zoom. Please give Chandra a very warm welcome.
Good evening to all of you. Secretary Raimondo, Ray Chambers, Ambassador Froman, Joe Bay, and other distinguished members of the steering committee, and ladies and gentlemen, it is true pleasure and honor to be part of this historic moment. This initiative, visioned by Secretary Raimondo, is a very, very commendable initiative. It has a very far-reaching vision, thinking through all the things the world has gone through in the last 5, 6 years, especially the pandemic, the geopolitics, the resulting supply chain crisis, and the massive energy transition that we have to go through. To come up with an initiative like this is very far-sighted. Let me start by congratulating Secretary Raimondo for her vision and leadership. I would also like to express my deep gratitude for including me as part of this initiative. IPEF is complementing the traditional security-based relationships across countries by creating a new coalition partnership, which is between regions, especially the US and this region, based on cross-border investment, supply chain resilience, energy transition, and most importantly, fair business practices and fair economy. And this is very important for this region and important for the world. Let me just give some data points which most of you may know. This region has a large population, 2.2 billion people, of which 80% of the people are below the age of 30, predominantly 25 and 30. And three of the countries, India, Indonesia, and Philippines, have close to 1 billion people below the age of 30. And this region also represents about 15% of the global GDP. And these countries are facing tremendous growth opportunity. And in the next 5 years, between these three countries, they'll be growing 7 to 9% every year. Coming to India, India has a very, very large skill base. US has a skill shortage. Just on semiconductor alone, there is an estimated 70,000 people shortage over this decade. India has 2.2 million STEM graduates, which is 1/3 of the total STEM graduates that the world produces every year. And in terms of energy transition, it is the need of the hour, and the development here for both supply chain and for energy transition, a lot of capital is required. India is currently investing about $1 trillion a year. This needs to go to $6 trillion a year by end of this decade. So for many reasons, be it India, be it Malaysia, be it Indonesia, the partnership is very, very pivotal. And given that, the timing could not be better. And I sincerely feel this partnership will definitely produce a strong resilience in supply chain across industries, be it semiconductors, be it batteries, be it some high-end pharmaceuticals, or even defense manufacturing. In each one of these areas, this can produce the kind of results that will maintain the friendship and provide the continuity, business continuity, resilience, and be a force for good and force for effective global governance. So I am really, really looking forward to work alongside all the steering committee members under the leadership of Secretary Raimondo. Private capital is very important. Our group alone, Tata Group, in the last few months, we have announced investment in excess of $20 billion just between semiconductors and batteries. And we will need more such investments, and we will need access to technology. All of that will come in this partnership. So I'm very keen to play a role in the Indo-Pacific region and US corridor, benefiting all nations in this partnership. Thank you for the opportunity. Nice to be with you all this evening.
Please welcome Secretary Raimondo and Joe Bay.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, this is truly an international partnership. You look at the steering committee, you've got not just folks from the United States, you have folks from North Asia, Southeast Asia. But I want to start, not surprisingly, with the United States and Secretary Raimondo. This administration has been very focused on the Indo-Pacific region. You've got the Quad, you've got AUKUS. The president convened Korea and Japan in a trilateral summit at Camp David, and then of course you've got the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. How does what should the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework convey to the region about the nature of the U.S. commitment to the region, and how does it fit in with all these other initiatives?
Thank you. Thank you for hosting, first of all, and thank you all for being here. We want them to know we're serious and it's enduring. I mean, if I were to sum it up briefly, this is meant to be an enduring, robust economic presence in the region. I heard you earlier joke about past efforts around multilateral trade agreements, and I appreciate the compliment that we've moved so swiftly here. Look, it's not a multilateral trade agreement. We may get there. We are not there now, but we need a serious, proactive, aggressive, comprehensive economic strategy and presence in the region. And so what we've said is we're going to focus on a few concrete issues that are most relevant today: resilient supply chains, coordination in supply chains, decarbonization, infrastructure, and work together with governments to unleash capital from the U.S. as well as the developed countries in the region. You mentioned Korea, Japan, et cetera. And what a success looks like, several years from now, we can point to real points on the board, like massive increases in U.S. investments in these countries, in these areas. And when I talk, how I'll know it's a success is when I talk to U.S. investors and I say, how's it going investing in Malaysia, Indonesia, India? Instead of saying, it's tough, it's slow going, no political cover, I worry about corruption, they say, it's different, it's better. And we are feeling good about our investments.
And the administration's talked about friendshoring and making sure that supply chains were resilient, redundant, secure, particularly either reshoring them onto the United States or having them be extended to our friends. Are these our new friends?
Yes, absolutely. Look, we can't make, mine, assemble, and test everything in the United States. I tease the president. I think if President Biden had his way, we would, because he wants everything made in America. But
in Delaware in particular?
No. Now that he's president, everywhere. Now he's equal opportunity. But for all reasons that everyone knows here, we cannot manufacture everything here. We don't want to manufacture everything here. But we cannot be so utterly reliant on one or two countries in Asia for critical components in our supply chain. And so if we can do more, I'm going to make up some examples, more semiconductor testing and packaging in Malaysia and Indonesia, yes, that is a good thing. If we can, the statistics Chandra just rolled out about India are unbelievable. Like shame, this is the most dynamic part of the world. These economies are fast, young, rapidly growing. So yes, they're our friends. And absolutely, we want to have a tighter, stronger economic relationship.
How much is this really all about China and trying to be a counterweight to China? In particular, this partnership, they've got the Belt and Road Initiative. They're pouring a lot of money into their neighbors, not only their neighbors, but all the way from their neighbors all the way to Europe at times. Is this intended to try and compensate for the hundreds of billions of dollars that they're putting out through the Belt and Road Initiative?
You know this better than I or anyone.
I usually only ask questions to which I already know the answer.
Exactly. That's not limiting in your case. You could ask a lot of questions. But when you go to these countries, next week I'll be in the Philippines and then going to Thailand. The first thing they say is, don't make us choose between the United States and China. To which we say, we have no intention of doing that. We're bringing our own capital, our own brand of American capital, which, by the way, comes with many fewer strings attached. What makes America great is our private sector, is our entrepreneurship and innovation and deep capital markets and expertise. So China does what China's thing is. They have a command control economy. That's not what we're doing. We are bringing private capital and know-how and technology to the region for our benefit. Quite frankly, it'll create jobs in the United States and for their benefit. And I think my own view, and I'd be interested in everyone's view, is in some ways they prefer that. They don't want to be told to choose, and we will never do that. But some of them have lived the painful experience of the strings attached and the debt that comes with the Belt and Road. And so this is an alternative. But it's not why to do it. Why to do it is because I said before, it's 40% of the world's GDP. It's fast growing. We need allies, and we need to be in the region.
Joe, you help run KKR. It's a modest-sized investment firm here in New York. You're deeply invested in this region, across this region.
Yep.
Why? Are the growth rates that much better than they are here? You can't find enough investment opportunities here in the United States. And how does this partnership help you as an investor think through what the opportunities are?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me here today. So I think this is an incredibly important topic for U.S. investors. We've been investing in Asia since 2005. Today, we are the largest private equity investor, largest infrastructure investor in that marketplace. And even as of today, we have a little over $55 billion invested in the IPEF region, in 10 countries in IPEF. And that's across over 110 portfolio companies in the region. So it is an incredibly important part of our economic investment activity for KKR. The reason we've been so active there, I think, is a lot of the macro structural things you heard from Chandra. Incredible growth rates, really attractive young demographics in India and Southeast Asia. Fundamentally, a lack of capital in many of these markets. You have a very, very shallow equity capital market. You have a banking industry that's dominated by traditional commercial banks, no access to bonds, high-yield bonds, other forms of financing. And that creates an extraordinary opportunity for firms like ours to provide capital and provide solutions. Now, in the 20 years that we've been investing in Asia, the one thing that has proven true every single time, regardless of the country, is you need a close partnership between private sector and governments. In America, sometimes you like to think, the private sector capitalism is separated from government. It's a free market. In Asia, everything ultimately boils down to a road back to the governments and regulators, whether it's tax policy, whether it's regulatory approvals. So that coordination and partnership with governments has been a huge part of the reason we've been able to invest in Asia successfully over the last 20 years, is we actually seek out that partnership. And I think what IPEF is doing is trying to take that to the next level.
Yeah.
And so do you think this will lead a lot of other firms to do what KKR has done in terms of, as you work with the U.S. government and with the governments in the region, to de-risk some of these investments or to help facilitate or break down barriers that might exist? Do you expect this to lead to significantly greater capital allocation to the region?
Yeah, I mean, even when I start with our own limited partners at KKR, our institutional investors, I would say from a portfolio construction standpoint, most large global institutional investors are underweight to Asia. And a lot of investors have significant exposure to China, perhaps, but not to many of these IPEF countries we're talking about. So I think there's a real need from a investor portfolio allocation to have more exposure to this part of the world. It's a question of how do you get that exposure in a risk-adjusted way that makes sense for them. Again, the public markets are not great alternatives. They're not very deep. They can't really do it through the credit markets. So a lot of the allocations come through private equity firms, where we can make very targeted bets with the right local partners, with the right governments backing those investments.
And it seems to me this is a particularly interesting moment for that because many investors are finding China difficult to invest in going forward. Some people are even calling it uninvestable. And so, but they want, as you said, allocation to a high growth region that Chandra described. Does that create lots of new opportunity for Southeast Asia, South Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about the macro trends, right? There is this broader trend around friendshoring. So supply chain security is an issue every CEO around the world is asking about, whether you're US CEO, European CEO, or Asian CEO. So you're going to see more investment around supply chain security, for sure. That's going to impact Southeast Asia. It's going to impact India in a very substantial way. A lot of investors, rightly, are focused on climate investing and energy transition. When you think about the growth rates that Chandra mentioned, right, ultimately that's going to drive energy consumption and energy intensity in all of these emerging economies, right? So more power needs. You know, Asia is probably the one place in the world where you're still seeing meaningful coal-fired plants being developed. They don't have enough renewables. They don't have enough green energy. So a tremendous opportunity, again, for institutional investors to provide that capital. But that only takes place in coordination, obviously, with governments and with regulators.
I think that is the precise point, which is there is opportunity. The fundamentals in many of these countries there's a lot of opportunity. I hear often from investors saying, you know, the political environment is a challenge, the lack of tax transparency is a challenge, corruption is a challenge, the whole thing. So the whole point of IPEF, these are government to government relationships, which we have signed the relationships at the government to government level for supply chain and good tax and anti-corruption and decarbonization. So we have, at the highest levels of these governments, you know, they've gone through their domestic political process. They've agreed to sign on to certain commitments around tax transparency, certain decarbonization goals, certain commitments around labor standards, certain commitments around anti-corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is, what we are trying to do at the government level is get commitments which are binding. Every one of these governments has gone through their domestic process to then kind of level the playing field or create the conditions for investors, US companies, to tap into the opportunity there. But I think to make it more concrete, and then the other thing we hear about all the time is some of these investments just aren't ready. And so we have a public-private partnership with the Project Accelerator to do project preparation, technical project preparation, especially for the infrastructure projects, especially in the developing countries, so that when folks like Joe or others of you come to the deal, you know, it's a set of financials that you can make sense of. The project preparation has been done, and it's more investable.
I was always surprised in those big infrastructure projects. It doesn't take that much money up front.
It's amazing, yeah.
To really unlock a lot more if you get the project preparation done. But what you're really focusing on is improving the investment environment, the laws, the regulations, the practices. Does the private sector need guarantees from government or multilateral institutions, risk insurance, blended capital, first loss, or is it enough just to have a good policy environment?
I would say yes to all the above, but understanding that's practically not going to happen in all circumstances. Listen, I think there are certainly agencies like the World Bank and the IFC that are trying to provide some sort of credit support or investment support, which has been helpful. And the reality, a lot of these projects in certain countries are going to be very difficult for Western investors today to invest behind. I actually think a very good model, and what I've seen work really well in a market like India, is the Modi administration has done, I think, two things that are extraordinarily helpful. Number one, they introduced a bankruptcy code many years ago in the first term, which did not exist in India. So when you think about crowding in private capital or lending to a market like India, foreign capital, that was foundational in terms of allowing foreign capital flow. And I think that's a big lesson that many other countries in the region, like a transparent, predictable bankruptcy code. The second thing India's done really well is privatization of infrastructure assets. So the government's been extremely transparent at the federal level about what assets they plan to privatize over the next 5 to 10 years. There are around 80 major assets in the country today that are on that list. Foreign investors, local investors, foreign companies can all look at that list, and they run very transparent auction processes for these assets. Those proceeds can then be turned around and invest in many of the projects you're talking about. There may be projects that are too early stage for foreign investors to invest in, but the government is recycling capital in a very smart way to invest in those projects. And at a certain point down the road, those assets may be investable for foreign investors. So I think those are some of the best practices, I think, across the IPEF countries that we should be sharing and talking about pretty openly.
I can see why this makes total sense for the other 13 IPEF countries. But, Madam Secretary, when you're traveling around the United States, how do you talk to the American people about why this is in their interest that we're doing this?
Look, it's a very fair point, and you lived this in what you tried to get done. I think the slight difference now is there's not a person in America who didn't experience supply chain disruption due to COVID. And so when you tell an American, it is, we buy all of our semiconductors from one company in Taiwan. We buy all of this particular, I had a call the other day with the CEO of a huge retailer in the United States who was struggling to sell, I don't want to share details, struggling to sell a product, and the product is only made in China. Like, they haven't figured out how to diversify that, and it's, killing their US customers and crushing this company. So when you tell Americans it's about supply chain resilience, they get that now. But the other thing too is, don't forget, during COVID, for want of a few semiconductor chips, in some cases to make windshield wipers work, tens of thousands of Americans were furloughed in auto manufacturers in Michigan, in Indiana, because we couldn't get access to chips. Same thing with refrigerators. Couldn't get access to parts to refrigerators that were coming from one company in one country in Asia. All the workers in America, go home. Go home, because we can't put together the cars and the washing machines until we get the chips. So what you say to Americans is, it is better for you, and frankly, safer for you, and your job is more stable if we can have a more diversified supply chain. Also, as Joe said, there's only a couple countries in the world still bringing online coal plants. That's bad for everyone. Like that's bad for the planet. And if we can work with these countries to decarbonize at a faster rate, that's good for everyone.
Let me open it up to questions here. Zoe?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. I think the first question, I guess I have two. My question would be two parts. The first part is in the context of Indo-Pacific Partnership for Prosperity, would you consider this as an alternative or a supplement to the lack of our free trade agreement in the region? Like, for example, we really do not have a free trade agreement with our arguably one of our best allies in the region, like Japan. So what's your point? What's your view on that? And then for Mr. Bay, perhaps you can share with us, based upon your long-term presence in the region, what is your secret in terms of making the non-bankable project bankable. I think, many times people say that China has the secret weapon. Many would say, oh, it's the China Sino-Shore China Export Credit Insurance Company. From your experience, what's your secret weapon? Thank you very much.
I would just say it's different than a trade agreement. It's not a substitute for. This is what it is. It is an economic strategy focused on a few particular areas that I have said, and I think it can be. I know it will be very meaningful. A trade agreement is a different thing, and I'll just remind everyone: trade agreements are typically second-term agendas. So, just going to say that.
Not holding my breath.
What do you know about this?
I would say in our experience, the way we underwrite investments, first and foremost, you have to have great local partners. So the vast majority of what we do in the emerging part of Asia, whether that's India, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, it's in partnership with local families and local entrepreneurs. They really are deep in that community. They understand the laws, regulations, how things happen in that country. So the largest and most important investments we've made in the emerging part of Asia has been in partnership with families. I think what we don't like in terms of underwriting is what we call stroke of the pen risk, right? So if there are regulatory things that can change based on political change in the country, those are typically situations that we are very, very careful about. We need the investment and the businesses that we invest in to stand on their 2 feet, right, in terms of the business case, the economics of the business model, and we really try to avoid stroke of the pen risk.
Great. Chris.
To that point, by the way, there is stroke of the pen risk everywhere at all times in some way, but I hope that the government-to-government relationships and deeper and continuous government-to-government collaboration at least reduces somewhat that stroke of the pen risk. So, for example, we'll have a ministerial, I and all of my counterparts in March, we'll do it again in June. We're constantly now talking to these governments. It doesn't guarantee anything, and legislatures can do anything at any time, CEG, the US Congress, but having this kind of formal relationship and framework really provides some political top cover. Those countries know what we want and expect, and also that we, we'll go to bat for you.
Absolutely.
Which is important, I think.
Yeah. And, over the years, we've built different tools at KKR. So we have an organization called the KKR Global Institute that's run by General Petraeus. So when we think about geopolitical risk or understanding where certain countries are trying to drive industrial policy, those are the types of resources we bring to really have a deep understanding of policy direction in these various geographies that we're investing in.
Go ahead, Chris.
Chris Turner, I work at Warwick Pincus. We have funds that have been investing in this region for over 30 years, so we're very encouraged by this development and, of course, willing to help it any way we can. Just to isolate one of your 3 pillars as a thought experiment, I know it's early. What are you thinking of in terms of specific examples to encourage alignment from the private sector, for example, in the supply chain area of the 3 pillars that you're talking about, to compel action? What are the specific things you're thinking about?
Well, I think in supply chain, a couple things. One, we are going to be having our first investor forum in June in Singapore, and I hope it's the first of many, where I will be there and all of my counterparts from the countries will be there. We will invite investors and companies to come to try to, do some matchmaking, actually facilitate some deals, get a feel for what's required to have those deals happen. Is it concessionary capital? Is it project preparation? If it is project preparation, like I said, we have a fund that is associated with this. Some of it is when you talk to companies, like you talk to U.S. companies, and this is semiconductor supply chain. They want to know if we, make these investments, will the local government in, India, whatever, Will they help us with an infrastructure build-out? Will they help us with clear, transparent, and speedy regulatory reform or regulations that have to happen or permitting? And so the IPEF, because we have this mechanism set up, continuous government-to-government discussion, it ought to be able to, that's what I meant by go to bat for you, we should be able to more quickly get some of these barriers out of the way on the ground to let capital flow.
I mean, if I could add to that question, answer, I think talking to U.S. corporates is a big part of the answer too. So if you're talking about, data centers, right? Talking to the big hyperscalers in the U.S. and in Europe, saying you're going to invest tens of billions of dollars in Asia in data centers and fiber. How can private sector investors help with that in partnership with these governments in different countries? The pharmaceutical supply chain is one of the big issues strategically, talking to the big pharma companies and to the FDA about how do we get more FDA resources focused on Asia. If we want India to be part of the solution, we're going to need to really beef up the FDA presence on the ground in India for inspections and everything else. So there's a lot of coordination, I think, in these strategic industries that should be driven by U.S. corporates, saying what their priorities are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, Joe, we had an event, an IPEF event in November at APEC in San Francisco. By the way, it was tons of energy. My counterparts, economic ministers, you can't believe how excited they are for this. They are really leaning forward. Anyway, we were on a panel, and CFO and president of Google said that they're planning really significant, undersea cables in the region to carry data, similar to data centers. Like, U.S. businesses, in this case hyperscalers, are making huge investments. So how do we work together to do that? What do they need from the government, our government, the governments of the country, from private sector investors, offtake agreements? So that's how concrete examples of what we'd like to get done.
I think this is one of the most creative uses of the capabilities of government in an innovative way, leveraging the private sector. And I just want to thank Ray Chambers for helping pull it all together, and Antonio Wise for also doing so, for Joe for agreeing to co-chair it with Chandra, and of course to Secretary Raimondo for being the inspiration behind this and the leadership. And we wish all of us best of luck in now executing on it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.